Hey guys, Miss Furian here. We're going to go ahead and look at Unit 2, Notes 3 today, Solving Systems by Elimination. So when using elimination, there's a couple steps we want to follow. We always want our equations to be in standard form. So all the way back in Unit 1, we talked about standard form being ax plus by equals c. So we always want the x and the y on the same side, and then our constant on the other. The first step then, once we're in that form, is to add the two equations together. It's really important that you're adding. This is one thing people like to subtract, but for elimination, we want to add the two equations together. In order for elimination to work then, one of the variables needs to cancel out. Once we do that, step number 2 then is solving for the remaining variable. And then step number 3, we have to substitute that back into one of the equations to solve for the other variable. There's some special cases we do have to watch out for. We can have infinitely many solutions. So that's going to look like if you were to solve an equation, both variables are going to cancel out, and what you have left is true. So that's going to look like a 0 equals 0 or 4 equals 4. Those are true statements, so that would tell me I would have infinitely many solutions, and we tend to write that as IMS. The second thing we can come up with is a no solutions, and that's when both variables cancel out, but what's left is false. So if I get a 0 equals 10, or 5 equals 6, those are false statements, so that would be a no solution problem. So let's go ahead and look at this first equation here. I have x plus 2y equals 10, and negative x minus y equals negative 6. We want to solve by elimination. So first thing I'm going to do is check, are these both in standard form? Well, they both are. The x and the y are on the same side. So I can go ahead and I can follow my steps. I'm going to add these two things straight down and hope that a variable cancels out. Well, I know when I'm looking at this that my x's are going to cancel out because an x plus a negative x, that gives me 0. So I'm going to do 2 plus a negative y, gives me 1y, and 10 plus a negative 6 is going to give me 4. So I get 1y equals 4. That's the same thing as saying y equals 4. So I know my first thing is y equals 4. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug that back into one of the equations to solve to figure out what x is going to be. So I'm going to use the first equation, x plus 2y equals 10. And now I know that y is 4, so I'm going to substitute that in. Times 4 is going to be 10. So I know 2 times 4 is 8. And now I'm just solving for x. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. So x is going to equal 2. So I need to solve this by writing the point that that makes. So the point that it makes is the 2, 4 point. That's my final answer. So I'm going to go ahead and look at example number 2 here. I get 3y equals negative 11 plus 2x, and 2x plus 2y equals 6. So first thing I always want to look for elimination, they need to be in standard form. Well, number 2 is not, or the first equation is not in standard form. I need to get the x and the y on the same side. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract the 2x from both sides. So when I do that, the new equation I'm going to end up with is a negative 2x plus 3y is going to equal negative 11. The second equation is in standard form, so I don't have to change that one at all. So I'm going to get 2x plus 2y equals 6. And now I can add them straight down. My 2x, those cancel out because they are the same number, one positive, one negative. So now I can add my y's. 3y plus 2y gives me 5y. Negative 11 plus 6 gives me negative 5. I need to finish solving for y here, so I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. So I get y equals negative 1. So again, I need to use that and plug it back in to solve for one of the other variables. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug it into the second equation. So I get 2x plus 2y equals 6. I know my y, though, is negative 1, so I'm going to substitute that in for the y variable. And I'm going to go ahead and solve this. So I'm going to get negative 2 equals 6. Solving for x, I need to add 2. So I get 2x equals 8 and then divide by 2. So I'm going to end up with x equals 4. So the point I have, remember the x variable comes first, so I get x is 4, y is -1. Example number 3 here. They are both in standard form, so I want to go ahead and I want to try to add these straight down and see if they cancel. Well, when I do that, my x plus a -7x, that's not going to cancel. If I do a -y plus a -y, that's not going to cancel. So I need to change one of these negative y's into a positive one so that they're opposite signs so that they cancel out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this top equation by -1. So what that's going to do for me then is I am going to actually end up multiplying every single thing by that. And I'm going to get a negative x, a positive y, and a -9. So now this equation is pretty much gone. I rewrote it down here, and now I can add straight down. So a -7x plus a -x gives me a -8x. A -y plus a positive y, those cancel. A -7 plus a -9 gives me a -16. Now I'm just going to finish solving for x. Divide by -8. So x is going to equal 2. So I'm going to use that for one of my equations. I'm going to use the one that I crossed out. It doesn't really matter. You'll get the same answer no matter which one you use. I'm going to substitute 2 in for the x variable because that's what I found this time, not the y. I'm going to finish solving now. So this is already a positive 2. To get rid of a positive 2, I'm going to subtract 2. Now don't forget, this is a -y. I got to carry that negative with. Now to get rid of that -y, it's like saying -1y. So I'm going to divide by -1. So y is going to equal -7. So the point I would get would be 2, -7. Next example here, I get -4x plus 2y equals 8 and -4x plus 3y equals 10. Again, if I go to try to add these straight down, nothing's going to cancel right now because those are both negatives. So I'm going to multiply this top one by a -1 again. When I do that to every single thing, I'm going to end up with 4x minus 2y is going to equal -8. And now I can kind of forget that one and add everything straight down. So my x's are going to cancel. A 3y plus a -2y is going to give me a 1y. 10 plus -8 gives me 2. This is again like saying y equals 2. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to plug it back into any of the equations. I'm going to go ahead and use that first one again. So I'm going to get -4x plus 2y equals 8. And we're going to substitute the 2 in for y because that's what we found it to be. So -4x plus 2 times 2 equals 8. I get -4x plus 4 equals 8. And we're going to just solve for x now. So subtract 4. And then divide by -4. So x is going to equal -1. So the point I would get would be -1, 2. So number 5 is going to change a little bit again. None of my numbers are the same for me, so I can't just multiply by a -1 and have some things cancel out. If I were to add these down, nothing would cancel. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, well, I need these variables to look the same. So I can try to make a 2 look like a 3, or I can try to make this 1y here look like a 4y. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that 1y look like a 4y. So I have to multiply this second equation by 4, but I need it to be the opposite of what was up on the top. So since that was a positive 4 on top, I need this to be a -4. So we're going to multiply that to everything again. So I'm just going to rewrite this. I started with a -3x plus 4y equals 12. We're leaving that equation the same. The second equation now, I'm going to get a -8x minus 4y is going to equal a positive 32. Now I can add these things straight down. A -3x plus a -8x is going to give me a -11x. A positive 4 and a -4, those cancel out. A 32 and a 12. Add those together, I get 44. So now we're going to finish solving by dividing by -11. So x is going to equal -4. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug that back in to one of the equations. I'm going to use that top one again. And I'm going to substitute -4 in for the x variable. And then we can just keep solving for y to figure out what y is going to be. So I get 12 plus 4y equals 12. Now, positive 12, we're going to subtract 12. So I get 4y equals 0. Now, we tend to see this and we go, whoa, I can't solve anymore. You can still finish solving this. I can divide by 4 and divide by 4. 0 divided by 4 is still just 0. And 0 is a number, so we like that. So x is going to be -4, y is going to be 0. Last example here before we do some word problems together. So these two equations, again, I need to make the number look the same but be opposite. So I can try to make this 3m look like the 10m or -3 look like a 5. Well, guess what? 3 can't look like 10 or 5. There's nothing I can times it by besides a decimal, but we don't ever want to use decimals. There's nothing I can times it by that's going to make it look like those. So in this situation, you have to multiply both equations by something. So I'm going to actually just flip-flop these. So I'm going to make this -3 look like this +5 by multiplying both of these things by something. So I'm going to multiply the top by the -3, or sorry, just by the 3. And then I'm going to multiply the bottom by the 5. So we're just flip-flopping those numbers. So my new equation, when I multiply everything through, on the top is going to be 30m plus 15n is going to equal 15. Equation on the bottom is going to be 15m minus 15n is going to equal 120. So now those 15s are the same but opposite signs, so we can add things straight down. So 30 and 15 is 45m. My n's are going to cancel and add 15 and 120, and I get 135. So now finish solving, divide by 45. M is going to equal 3. Take that, plug it back in for m, and solve for n. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to use the bottom equation this time. I'm going to switch it up a little bit here. So I'm going to do 3 times 3 minus 3n is going to equal 24. So I get 9 minus 3n equals 24. Solving here, positive 9, we got to subtract 9 then. Divide by -3. So n is going to be a -5. So now, a lot of the times I get the question, well, Ms. Fearing, which one's my x and which one's my y? Think about your alphabet. Which letter comes first in the alphabet? M, N, O, P. So M is your X technically, and N is your Y.